Yes, right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie. I'm the founder of the C Collective, and I'm really happy to welcome you together with Mark for this webinar around how to design outstanding user experiences to scale sustainable innovation. So we're very happy to share our experience with you guys today and through this webinar. So a few words about the C Collective. We're a user experience and marketing consultancy. Our headquarters in the UK, but we operate at the European level and serve clients globally. What we do, basically, we help people and planet-friendly entrepreneurs and organizations by designing or optimizing their end-to-end user experience. So we work on the strategy and user research fronts, really to understand the business needs, the markets, the users, and make sure that the design of the products, the services, and the overall experience is built around this foundation of understanding and insight. So we work on creating, testing, designing products, services, and overall customer or employee experience, but as well also on branding and marketing strategy. We also help when needed on implementation support, so making sure the underlying business processes that are supporting the end-to-end user experience are fit for purpose. And we also have an activity of training and mentoring on our core areas of expertise, but also on climate science. And these are the partners that we work with, so clients and partners in the UK and Europe mainly. So just a few introductions on our background with Mark. So I have been working in marketing and tech for as long as I can remember, but I was also really interested in sustainability because I did my thesis on this topic back in the days. Also, I'm a circular economy consultant, so very passionate about redesigning businesses to make them circular and regenerative. And I've worked with lots of blue chip startup organization in the B2B and B2C space. And so the idea behind the foundation of the C Collective was really to focus my work on organizations with a positive social and environmental impact. And Mark and I also are supporting the work of a charity called Climate Fresk, which delivers climate science and literacy workshops. I strongly advise you to look them up if you want to learn more about climate science. Over to you, Mark.
Hi, morning, afternoon, everyone. So my name is Mark, you probably guessed. I look after all things to do with design, user experience, service design, that sort of thing. Been here for, I think it might be years now, 2 years or so. And just helping Marie and the rest of the team to help drive user experience, user centricity, design thinking practices, etc. And so forth. And as I'm speaking, I've seen a note from Martin. Hi, Martin, all the way from the Netherlands, web designer and low-code developer. Thanks for joining. Nice to see you.
Welcome, everyone, and feel free to keep going. And hey, Martin, and continue writing up your intros and also expectations and any questions that you may have. We'll pick them up as we go. And you know the drill. You know how this chat works. Great. So what's the agenda for today's session? First, we'll give a bit of context about why it's so hard to grow sustainable innovation at the pace that we would like. So what are the challenges and opportunities around marketing sustainable innovation? In particular, we'll talk about the barriers to sustainable consumption in the light of behavioral science, which I'm quite passionate about. And then we'll go into a generic or general introduction into the science and art of user experience and give you an overview of the various tools, the sort of toolbox that we use in our projects. And we'll cover some best practices. And finally, we'll take some questions. So feel free to put them in the chat as they pop up into your mind. So what are the challenges and opportunities of marketing sustainable innovation? The first thing that we can see, and that I'm sure a lot of you might be frustrated about, is that when you look at the news, they are full of stories like these ones, you know, research publications or just news headlines showing the huge discrepancy between what people say around their attitude on climate and sustainability issues. They all want to do more, basically, but what they do, whether it's, you know, how they consume, how they invest their money, how they vote as well, just to name a few examples. So, and this is what's really interesting. And so there are lots of ways to explain that, and we'll dive into a few of them. Another interesting, so the examples before were, you know, research and news. If we look at also things like market share of sustainable products, there is a huge discrepancy between people's attitude. So this stat is 83% of people want to do more to protect and restore nature, for instance. But when you look at the market share, we're nowhere near there. And I usually quiz people on a particular stat. What do you think is the market share of organic products in on the food and drink market in the UK? I know it's a bit of a far-fetched one, but I'd be happy to see if people can make a guess, an educated guess through the chat. I don't know if there's some people coming from the UK, but yeah, just take a guess. What's your guess? Is it 1%? Is it 10%? Is it 15%? What do you think? Okay, Martin is very active today, 4%. Any other guesses? I'd like another guess so that I can have a winner. 7%, Guillermo. Okay, so Martin is the winner. He's not not that close, but it's better than Guillermo. Sorry. So it's about 2%. So thank God this figure sometimes is growing, but it's quite stable around 2%. And you think, you know, for such a supposedly wealthy countries, this chat should be much higher. And the same goes for EV sales. So again, this is growing. But we're still nowhere near the sort of 83% of positive attitudes that we are seeing when people you know, declare their attitudes. So there's a huge gap. Okay, so we're looking at 80% of positive attitude and maybe 10% of market share if we oversimplify. And this is why we're here. This is the gap we want to bridge by scaling all those people and planet-friendly solutions. So why is this gap so wide? Well, if we there's a lot of explanation, but I would like to focus on the insight from human science. And the short answer is that it's all written in our genes. There are, according to evolutionary psychology, there are 5 sort of ancestral forces at play, which is self-interest. So we always think about our interest first. Short-termism, so we are not really good at seeing you know, things that are beyond the very short term, and similar way we disregard the risks that you can't really see because they are far off in time or in distance. And there is social limitation. That's also, so that's an issue, but that's also an opportunity as well. And the last one is status. So there is still an important role of status. And it was really important back in the days where, you know, male had to be dominant to get the access to the best females and so on. But this is still, you know, present in our societies in this day and age. But basically, the good thing is not everything is fixed in our genes, and there are opportunities to evolve through culture. Beyond evolutionary psychology, there's some interesting insights from behavioral psychology and economics. And the first one is that overall people are just far from rational, especially when it comes to tackling social and environmental challenges. And there are you have a link in the source to the book here, which is called What We Think About When We Try Not to Think About Global Warming. And so in this book, from an academic, they talk about 5 different barriers, and we'll go through some of them. And all those barriers are creating, are making the sort of this is so the climate messaging is sort of struggling to come across to overcome those barriers. So the first one is distance. So a lot of the problems that social and environmental problems are remote or feel remote because we can't really see them in our own geographies or in our own time. But even if they are coming closer to us and we are seeing all the extreme weather events in Europe, most people still feel they're still quite remote and don't necessarily act upon them. Then there is this the doom element. So of course there's a lot of negative framing of climate change and extreme weather events, but there's also a lot of negative framing around the change that is required. So a lot around cost, loss, sacrifice. And this creates a need for some people, simply avoid the topics. It's quite uncomfortable, and people just avoid it because they just feel helpless. And so this kind of fear message, the doom message, backfires into inaction. Then you have cognitive dissonance. I think attitude to smoking is a very good analogy, but basically it's the mental process happening when a new reality conflicts with what people want to believe. And this dissonance sets in so that we can feel better about how we live and with ourselves. So that's a very important psychological mechanism that's at play in many topics, many contexts, but in attitude to climate change in particular. And then something that we are seeing a lot at the moment is the identity filter. So we all filter news through our professional, political, cultural identities, and we look for this kind of confirmation bias that will confirm that our existing values and notions. So we filter out things that don't match our values or identity. And we're seeing this at play massively in the polarization of politics and the topic of climate change in politics. This is a chart from the US, and it shows the different attitudes to climate change, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And there's a huge gap between these two. And so this is really something to acknowledge and be mindful of, because it applies to many, many contexts. So this is quite depressing, but there are some opportunities. So let's move on to this one, and how user experience as a broad discipline can overcome those barriers. So before I tell you, how we define user experience at the C Collective, I would love to see your thoughts on the topic. So if you could just put through the chat some thoughts about what user experience is for you, and we will build up on that and use that to have a discussion. So yeah, please feel free to use the chat and share your thoughts. And there's no right or wrong answer. Usually when we ask this question, we have lots of the pieces of the puzzle that we put together. Don't be shy. Use the chat. What is UX or user experience for you? Okay, so we have a few suggestions. The interaction between client and host, user interaction in the site. Okay, so that's in the context of a website. The overall experience that a person has when interacting with a product, system, or service. Yeah, that's a good one. How satisfied a customer is when engaging with a product and service, and the way people feel while interacting with a product, service, or simply a brand. And Felipe is coming up with another suggestion. Just, I'm seeing this 3 dots. Wow, Felipe is writing a full story on this. A process that creates meaningful experience to users. Okay. Thank you very much for all these propositions. I think we've got the key elements to describe user experience. So we'll just give you our definition. So basically, we define user experience as the product of a sequence of interactions between users and an organization across different channels and over time. So it is really about, so you mentioned this feeling element. So it is true. It is really about how your users will experience your brand across all its facets before, during, and after they get in contact, and how you will make them, feel in a positive or negative way. And that's really important. So we believe that this definition is working, no matter what the relationship of the user with the organization is. So it could be a prospect, somebody who is not yet your client. It could be a user who is paying or not paying. It could be a B2B client or a B2C client. But it could also be a partner, a prospective partner. It could also be an employee or an applicant. We're talking about employee experience in that case. And if you're funded by investors or looking for funding, investors are also super important in your user types. Or they could be an influencer. So really, it's about creating and strategizing interaction with a whole set of users across all your different channels, and it's about this emotional connection that you can trigger. So basically, I think this is really a framework that we like to use, that combines some marketing and buying journey stages that people might be familiar with. But what we believe is that an efficient user experience strategy should cover all the stages and channels of the buying journey. Often we think that, there's businesses that invest a lot in the, engage and conversion stages. But the reality is a lot of the buying journey has started before people actually get in contact with you by picking up the phone and being in contact with your sales, or just getting onto your website. So the user experience doesn't start on your website. It starts way before in your in the stories, in the brand different brand facets that you have to create at a very early stage. So it's super important that you have this holistic view of the user experience and end-to-end across channels. So really the goal of this is to create a virtuous buying journey where your users are moving smoothly from one stage to the next and end up becoming, advocates of your service. And this is where, when all your business processes align towards this holy grail, your operations are super efficient, your teams are happy, and your customers are happy. So you grow with affordable customer acquisition cost, and you're usually on a very good journey to sustainable growth. So if we look back at the barriers, the psychological barriers to action. This is, for instance, how UX good user experience can help overcome them. Just giving you some concrete examples. So we talked about the distance barrier. So it's about making sure in your messaging, in your design, that the issue feels near and personal to your audience if you want them to act upon it. For instance, these are two different, news, and obviously the one to the right might be more touching the hearts of European customers than the one at the left. Cognitive dissonance. So this is where the user experience and things like architecture of choice can help reduce dissonance by providing easy ways to take action. This is an example of a checkout which has an offsetting option or a donation to a charity, which is highlighted in green and almost shown as a default option. So again, this architecture of choice and the overall principle of making things easy for people to act upon is super important in the how do you design your products and services. So now I'm going to hand over to Mark to explain how, all this user experience toolbox and how you actually get to designing great user experiences.
Yes, thanks. So when we try to apply all these theories and concepts that Marie's just talked through, it's basically three phases. We can break it down into many different models and frameworks, but keep it simple. We've got three things here: a bunch of research that we do, a bunch of design, and then testing and validation. So research is all about trying to empathize with the people that we're trying to build solutions for, understand what their problems are, understand what opportunities there might be, some themes, some patterns, observations, those sorts of things. And we can collect those via personas, journey maps, and such like. And we have some examples that we can share with you a few slides time.
Do you want this slide still? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So once you've done a bunch of research-based things, we move over to design, and we use all that insight to help us make informed design decisions. And we can start to create things like service maps, information architecture diagrams, wireframes, and visual designs. And these are ways for us to articulate the proposed solution that we want to go ahead and build. But before we go ahead and build it, we want to make sure we've actually solved the problem that we've learned from the research phase. So we do some testing and we do some validation. And basically we go on this circle: research, design, test, research, design, test, over and over again, until we get something where we think, right, we've hit the minimum viability now of something that actually solves problems. Let's go and build it. And it's much cheaper for us to iterate a design than it is to iterate an implementation or change some code. We're only changing pictures during design, and that's relatively straightforward when you compare it to the change and the effort required when changing a built product. So as an example, on the next slide, we've got some examples here of different types of research. So I broke down the process into three phases, and now I'm breaking down research into three phases. We've got preparation, we've got the execution, and we've got the analysis. So during the preparation, we can do stuff right now. We don't have to wait for anybody or anything. So we can get on our laptop right now and start searching. We've seen some articles Marie's shared about some things in the industry. There's nothing stopping us from doing something similar. We can find out what everyone else knows already. Maybe if we're lucky, we might have some analytics that's already used in our product. Maybe there's some opportunity to do some analysis on that. But we can start to think about what are our assumptions, what are our problems, what are our observations that we are hearing, learning, seeing from all different people that we interact with. We can talk to stakeholders, we can talk to users, we can talk to a whole bunch of different people. And then this would bring on to the actual execution, which we've called run the research. So recruiting participants is basically recruiting users. What we can do is we can choose different types of users, and we can refer back to our personas. to identify what are our target personas, what are our target profiles of people that we're looking to gather insight from. And it might be that we have some open-ended questions, or we're just trying to find out what they think. Or maybe we have some specific tasks that we want them to try and execute on a design or on our existing system or a competitor's system, for what it's worth. Give them a task and see what their pains are along the way, see if any opportunities to make things simpler. And this could be via a focus group, it could be via a survey or a questionnaire, it could be by just sitting at the back of an office and making some observations, or it could be moderated or unmoderated interviews, one of which is one-to-one. So it's interesting. We don't need to actually speak to that many people to find most of the problems. So I think someone might be able to correct me later on when we come to Q&A, but I think it's around 4 or 5 people from a particular persona within a particular scenario is all you need to get about 80% of usability issues. Obviously, in isolation, that might not be true, but if you keep applying this in that iteration that I was mentioned before, then over time, we should be in a place where we are regularly collecting these usability issues relatively quickly and with relatively little effort as well. But nevertheless, before we move on to the design phase, we need to analyze everything that we have collected. We need to look for themes, we need to look for patterns, we need to look for weight and scale and things like this. And there are 2 ways, well, actually there are many ways, but there are 2 ways to talk about today that we can do that. One of which is using personas and another one is user journeys and experience maps. So on the next slide.
And I was just going to add, Mark, that
Yeah.
if you're a founder or an entrepreneur, it's always tempting because you have limited budget and time to rush or not do research before you launch your website or before you launch an application or service. But as you can expect, I think this is really something that should not be rushed, and that you need to invest a minimum of time to do it and to do it properly. And even if you don't have time to interview 20 users or show your prototype to 20 users, just doing it, with a few of them and spending, an hour running through interviews or user testing is a hugely valuable investment for you to de-risk your project further down the process. Like Mark said, before you go into hiring developers to build your project, or before you launch something that hasn't been tested. As Mark said, you will probably get 80% of the issues through doing this process, and you will also get a lot of opportunities and ideas just by talking to people. So that was my my intervention.
Thank you. Yes, probably just to highlight that this is all cheap. Research is cheap. Changing a product is expensive in comparison. So the more insight we get, hopefully the fewer changes we have to make to our product, prototype, idea, proof of concept, whatever it is that we're building. So one of the ways to collect and formalize and communicate the insight that we collect is through something called a persona. Here's an example of what a persona may look like. There are some things on here that are useful and interesting, and there are certain things that maybe aren't useful and interesting. The fact that this lady is 30 and single might not impact if we're trying to create a sandwich shop, but it might if we're creating a dating app, for example. So we have to pick relevant information for the particular persona, the particular problem, scenario, industry, etc. But this is a collection of different types of information that we might want to use as our insight. So we've got a little bit of a description about who this person is, the sorts of things that she's looking to achieve in her objectives and motivations, the things that she's struggling with, whether she's got pains or there's challenges, daily activities, so the jobs to be done and things like that. So the purpose of this is not necessarily to cram as much information or as much superficial information in here. We don't care how many dogs this person's got or what their favorite food is. What we care about is the attributes or the traits about this individual that will impact the desirability of the product that we're trying to build. So if we're building a banking app, Doesn't matter how many dogs or cats someone has. If we're building a pet app, maybe it does. So we need to make sure that they're relevant for the topic at hand. And Jasmine has got a little bit of everything in here, which probably isn't tailored for a particular solution, but hopefully it gets the point across about personas. Typically, you would have many personas for a particular product. You might have an administrator, you might have an active user, you might have a passive user. You can think of a whole range of different personas, and they all have different needs, different objectives, and different goals. And we need to make sure that our solution fits for all of these different people and their needs. There's no point making it really great for one person and rubbish for someone else, because that will cause more problems in the long run. So anyway, trying to focus on different people, trying to understand, trying to empathize with them and what they're trying to achieve will only help aid our design decisions.
And just on this particular one, again, if you're a founder launching a venture, this is an investor persona. You'll have to engage with investors, so it's also quite relevant and useful to create, a separate investor persona to make sure that your end-to-end user experience caters for the needs of a prospective investor, because this is going to be a super important persona to engage in at this stage of your company on top of your target users.
So once we've started to think about the person and what they want to achieve, we have to try and work out how they're going to do that. So here's an example of a user journey or an experience map or a journey map or whatever language we want to use. It's very messy, it's very busy, but they're supposed to be. So all this is trying to articulate at the moment is that there's this problem. We have a collection of activities that this particular persona needs to do. So this is John, it says here. And then the various screens that are needed in order to deliver this. And you can see on the left-hand side, there are various channels in order to do so. And it might be simple to say, right, let's just create a new website. But it's not just a website that impacts the user and their experience. It's a whole bunch of all the different channels that they have and touch points with the company and with the product. So yes, there's the website, but there's also the advertisements that they use, or they might trigger their excitement or interest in our particular product. There's the search engine. How does that interact with the product? Does it take them to the specific place they want to go? How's that metadata handled? Depending on the size and the scale of the product, thinking about the media. Influencers, which is becoming more and more of a thing. And maybe I'm a bit too old to be an influencer, but these things happen and we need to take into account all these different channels, including sales, marketing, and all the other people that sit within our, customer support, customer success, all these sorts of functions within the business. So it's not just about changing some colors on a website. We need to make sure everything's joined up to ensure that we have a consistent user experience that makes sense end to end across all these different rows we've got here. So there's a lot more stuff we can do when it comes to research, a lot more insight that we can collect, a lot more templates or models we can use to convey that information so that our designers have the relevant information to make decisions. We've just picked out 2 here, but there are many, and Google is your friend there. But if we move on to design now, we have a bunch of things we need to do again. And this list could be 200 bullet points long. To keep it simple within the time we've got 5 here. So we have talked about mapping user journeys, whether they're end-to-end or whether they're particular channel. We've got potentially service maps and blueprints, so we talk a little bit about that. And then you've got the fundamental product design, the website design, the app design, whatever it is you want to do. And within there are 3 things that we want to specifically call out today. The information architecture, or the IA, the wireframes, and the visual design. So 3 particular elements there of going through the design phase. And like I said, there's many of these things. In reality, there might be 20 things we need to do. We're going to keep it simple and just talk about 3. And the first of which is IA, information architecture. So very similar to a site map. As you can see on the right-hand side, there's a picture here that illustrates how the website, in this case, is architected or constructed and organized. So this is relatively straightforward because it's just a website. So if we had an actual product here, it would fill the page and it would be hard to get any sense of concept out of that. But the principal point is to try and organize the product in a way that makes sense, not because of the databases or because of some technical framework, but because it makes sense to the user. Grouping information into collections or categories that make sense. Things that are related should be closer together than things that are unrelated. And here's an example about how you might have some sort of navigation across the site to group these different entities. But you can imagine something more complicated like Amazon, for example, where they've got all these different types of products that they sell that have categories and subcategories, and you can search and sort and filter, and it gets quite complicated quite quickly. But once we've done the site, or in this case, we've called it the high-level information architecture, we can break this down. So each of these boxes would then in itself have potentially another tree that would be broken down. So there's a thing here called career, and that might be broken down into different departments within an organization. And then we go bubbles all the way down to eventually we'll get to a page, and then we'll have a common information architecture on the page as well. Everything will have a footer and a nav bar and a top bar, and there might be a search in the top right hand corner. We might have the same navigation on all the pages to add that layer of consistency. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can use to start thinking about pages, and this is where we start thinking about wireframes. The wireframe is the grey looking one on the right hand side. We've got these big grey boxes, and this is start to think about how we're going to architect a particular page within our product. Easy example would be a web page, an individual web page. We are trying to work out the best way to architect all the information. So this is an example of CNN, as you can see in the bottom right now. And just looking at this now, this little tiny thumbnail view, very busy. But it all depends what CNN are trying to do. What's their objective? Are they trying to get people to go to CNN Life? Because that's the thing that my eye goes to. It's on the top right, it's big and red and it's easy to read, and there's a button on it. So it's thinking about where you want to position the highest priority content on the particular screen, but also ensuring that we have a consistency across all these screens. We don't want 100 screens that look completely different from one another with completely different structure and architecture. We want to have a set of common reusable patterns. So it's ensuring that we've got this across all of our products. So this is why wireframes are really useful, because it helps us to build out these particular patterns that we can start to apply throughout. So we've talked about very few things, a few methodologies and approaches. On this next slide is just give a little bit more of a step back at some other opportunities that we could explore. So I'm not going to read them all out because we've only got 20 minutes or so left, but just to call out a few. So we've called out user observation. I mentioned that earlier, which is an interesting way to just see what people are doing on the particular products as part of research. So it's interesting that there's a difference most of the time between what people think and what people say. And if you go on an interview with someone and you ask them a particular question, they will know that you're listening and you'll be judging whatever their response is. So how often do you recycle? Oh, I recycle all the time. I don't throw anything away. But actually, when you actually watch them, they don't. So there's a difference between what people say and what people do. And that's why when you interview someone, it's quite nice to complement that insight with the collection of observations. And you can see how they marry up. It also gives you confidence that the insight that you're collecting through conversation actually represents, to some extent, the truth of the world. So that's one thing to highlight in research, where we're finding the key facts and assumptions. And then we move over to testing. So this is where we take potentially our design. So it could be a paper prototype where I've sketched an idea down on a piece of paper with a pen. I'm going to find out what people think. I could literally just draw a picture in 5 minutes and show someone, and then I'll get some feedback. I might have a fully fledged product right now. I've got this great idea for this new feature, and I don't know if anyone will like it. So I could just create a button on my page called My New Feature, and we could monitor how many times people click that button. It's a way to, we've got fake door test down here. It's just a way to learn, is this feature useful or not? We have to manage that correctly, otherwise it's going to annoy people. But there are lots of different ways in which we can collect insight, understand how usable something is, how accessible something is, or how desirable something is. And then we can have a little bit more formality in the way that we are collecting our insight through experimentation. And we can use some tools for this. So partial rollout, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. A/B testing is too. But multivariable testing or multivariant testing is quite interesting, where if you imagine on that CNN design we showed on a few slides back, there's probably 1,000 different combinations of all the different boxes you can have, the sizes of the boxes, the positions of the boxes, the size of the fonts, the shoutiness of the CTA, etc. And we basically could guess what combination is best and test it and see what happens. Or we could use a platform that creates 1,000 variants for us with all different possible combinations, and then we can have some metrics like conversion metrics associated with that to find out which one is best. We've got 1,000 different possible combinations of all this content, and it turns out that variant 227 performed the best. We had the most customers buy the most products there. So maybe we start there and we iterate from that particular candidate. And that's a way for us to continually evolve and develop our ideas. And I think that that's pretty much the theme, which is testing stuff. And this is the next slide is an example of how I talked about paper prototyping before. And this is a somewhat silly example of trying to do that, where you've got this paper prototype that's been cut out to fit an actual mobile phone. You can see what it feels like when you've actually got it at that size. You can use your finger and your thumb and how far away something might be. And it's just a way to get initial thoughts. Drawing that thing out there and that piece of paper probably took a few minutes. It may be a bit long because they've got those coloured circles, but let's say 10 minutes at most. It's not a very expensive task to do. And it's really quick and easy to get some sort of feedback on, you know, the viability of such a solution. And this is the theme. So on the left hand side now, we've got a couple of tips here. So testing with rounds of 5 to 8 users is usually enough to flag most issues, which we mentioned before. And there's another principle that's become quite popular at the moment, which is, or over the last 10 years or so, is mobile first. So it's typically harder to design for a mobile because you've got no space. So you have to be really, really strict about what's in view for the user and how they navigate around the screen. You don't have such a constraint if you're designing for a desktop or a laptop. So it really forces you to think about the best way to architect, the best way to lay out your product. And those lessons and those principles and practices that you're putting in place when you're designing for mobile can easily be put onto a desktop. Yes, you need to make a few changes here or there, but by going through that thinking, it makes that whole process much smoother. So here's an example of testing a particular idea on a phone, because it's harder, typically harder, to design with such limited space. And so if we circle back now to the great user experience, we asked the question earlier, and in principle, I think we're all converging on a similar definition, but probably three things to call out. We've got more emotions, less friction, more empowerment. Probably good user experience. It is, well, we've got some good building blocks, and we've talked about how we can make that happen. There's a bunch of points here. We've sort of talked about all of those things. The last of which, just to emphasize again, is start small, test, iterate, or test and learn. And you can never stop learning. So keep applying that. And before we finish, we've got 6 principles or practical advice that you can take away and see if you can start applying it right now in your products. So number one is, are there any opportunities to bring your product to life? So here's an example of Skyroom, where they are building sustainable homes, and we could just have, how many carbon dioxide tons we save or whatever, but let's excite people with the actual product. Let's get them seeing, visualizing themselves living in this environment or working in this environment. So is there a way to bring your product to life? It could be through visuals like this. It could be through a storytelling. There's a whole bunch of different tools and techniques you can use. But how can you make people fall in love with your product? Second one is, you're not alone. We're not recreating, we're not designing something brand new. Yes, the fundamentals of the product will be different, but standard principles about how websites work have been around since the 90s, I think. So let's utilize that. And there are certain places we can start from scratch, like website builders and themes. And the top example here is our website, which we've used Wix. And we just utilized all the functionality that comes from that. Yes, we've styled it. Yes, we've customized stuff, but we didn't have to build all this stuff from scratch. We had, we cheated really, and we jumped in halfway through this process to get something that works, does what we wanted to do, and allows us to get feedback quickly. And then we're learning, we're able to iterate and make it better. The next one is less is more. I think this is a man that does one of those.
It's The Voice or something like that.
The Voice.
The buzzer.
The buzzer on The Voice. And it's just trying to articulate that you have very little time to create a first impression. And I'd just like you to think about when you've been to a website and you're already annoyed within seconds or excited within seconds about a particular thing. And less is more. So try to convey whatever message it is you want to say, whatever your primary message is. You say it multiple times, but keep it simple in what you're trying to say. So look, this website, it says underfloor insulation installed by a robot. I'm not going to be any clear about what the point of this company is. So now I'm intrigued and I want to learn a little bit more. And I click that massive red button and find out more. I could bombard the user with statistics and I could have paragraphs of content, but it's just very simple and it's easy to consume. So if you have a very simple message for your product, it's easy for people to understand what the point of this thing is and therefore use it. The next one is we should accept that a user's journey is interrupted, and the likelihood of someone going on a journey that is simple, easy, it's the happiest path someone can do is unlikely. And they've got other things going on in their lives. Yes, when we interview someone and we do a usability test, they will have one thing that's their focus, which is what we're asking them to do. They'll be showing their screen, they'll be going through it formally and logically. But it's really important to remember that when people are using our products, they are not following that predefined path. They're not in a formal environment where they know they're being watched. So we need to cater for unhappy paths or unhappy scenarios just as much as happy paths. So as it says here, identify leaks, fix them, to re-engage users, to keep them on the track. And an example might be you've added a bunch of things to your basket, you leave the website and you come back and it says, hi, did you know you've got 6 things in your basket? Do you want to pick up from where you left off? That sort of thing helps people to resolve unhappy paths. And here's an example of someone's, it looks like they're buying a suitcase in that example there. So I've got 2 more tips before we move to Q&A. So we've sort of mentioned this before when we're talking about heat waves in India versus price of beer, but try and make, well, hopefully we're all trying to do stuff to save the planet, and the language that we use and the metrics that we use in the industry are sometimes difficult to relate to for someone who's outside of the industry. So just bombarding with me how many metric tons something has saved, I don't know if that's a lot or a little or what that means. But what I do know is if I relate it to a cup of coffee or a number of trees or the size of a football pitch or something, we used chips as an example, chips and beer before, something that I understand and relate it to that, and you've got far more chance somebody understanding what it is you're trying to do and desiring your product, which is all what we're trying to achieve, isn't it? And then the last one is try and treat your customers of a website the same way that you would treat your customers of something more physical. So if I walk into a hotel, and if it's a good hotel, there'll be somebody at the door who greets me and tells me how wonderful I am and offers to carry my bag and does a whole bunch of stuff. Yes, they are not selling that. They are selling a bed and maybe breakfast, but they've got this whole thing about onboarding me, in quotes, into the hotel. And it's a far more pleasant experience than rocking up at a cheap hotel and having to type my name into a computer and the key comes out at the bottom like an ATM machine. And it's similar here, where when someone is using your product, it's the first time and only time to have a first impression. And if we can help people on that journey, give them the onboarding experience, then they're more likely to continue on that journey to the end goal, which is buying our thing or subscribing to our thing. You know, these unboxing videos become relatively viral, where, you know, there's been a lot of time and effort, people like Apple designing what shape the box is and how you open it and how you feel taking the device out of the box and opening it for the first time. Lots of thought has gone into that, even though you just hopefully recycle that packaging that comes. Effectively, you just chuck it all away. But that first impression is really important, and we should remember that it's equally important when we're coming to a digital product like a website or a digital product. So within 55 minutes, it's really hard to try and encapsulate a whole discipline of user experience, but hopefully we've covered enough to excite you or interest you. But there is a lot more. We just scraped the surface here. We've got some time for Q&A now. Marie and I can go through that, but thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. I hope you found it somewhat valuable.
Thank you for your attention. So I think there's some questions popping up. Yes, we got your point on adding Webflow to the easy tools that we can use. It's true. How can we fight capitalism? I love the beginning of the sentence, which is based in short-term profit and not long-term sustainable solutions. Well, I think the short answer to this question is by redesigning the system. And I think it's a design challenge. We need to shift from this capitalistic extractive model to a circular regenerative system. And I think that designers have got a huge role to play in this, and including, you know, shaping a more positive framing around the story of this, what this could become, not only about, you know, cost and sacrifice, and inspiring people around this new system. But it's a big design challenge. Yeah. I want to write a blog on this topic, actually. So Felipe, I'll keep your details for review and inputs, maybe. Yeah, for sure. Super interesting topic. And actually, we are partners of the Donut Economics Action Lab, and we are thinking about creating some workshops to better explain what regenerative business entails, you know, the planetary boundaries, the donut economics concepts, and see if we can help or facilitate for some businesses a process to redesign their business to a truly regenerative business. So working along all the planetary boundaries and so on. Yeah, so if people are interested in this topic, we're just starting on that journey ourselves, or building an offering for that and a journey for that. Are there any other questions? Despite all data available today on global warming, how can we drag attention and traction of people to a topic which is considering boring for most of them in time before humanity collapses? Okay. So Mark and I and other members of the collective are are facilitators of a workshop, which is based on, I'm going to put the name here, climaterescue.org. It's a charity that has this game based on cards, and it's what we call a serious game. It's a really fun and collaborative experience to learn about climate science and to reflect on what you can do about it. So it's one of the many tools out there. So check it out. You can, if you want, you can also become a part of the army of volunteers that facilitate those workshops in schools, in public places, in companies as well. So yeah, tipping my toes into sustainability and climate tech, and what I experience is great complexity in explaining the solutions. For example, the website. You almost need to be in climate tech to understand what the majority of these companies are doing. I think that is bad UX because it includes a lot of people. What is your take on that? It feels like a closed system to me. So I think this is we touched on this a little bit. Like Mark was saying, you have to pass this sort of 10-second test when people look at what's above your fold on your website, and try to make sense of this through the the choice of words and imagery that helps people to click. I think you have to adapt the level of complexity to your audience. A lot of our clients, for instance, they are B2B companies. So in a sense, they don't necessarily have to educate their market on the jargon and everything. They have to keep it simple because especially people like investors or influencers like journalists might not be absolutely knowledgeable about what is it that they are doing. But they can still be quite, find the right level of complexity to explain their offering using simple words. So it's a balancing act. And it's true that we always advise clients to have different levels of complexity in their website and in the journey that they present to people. So the homepage should be super approachable, but then you can have a technology page, you can have a technology a solution page for each of the verticals that you are or vertical solution that you're offering, and you can also have even more like technical product sheets for people that are super geeky and that are interested in reviewing every tech and aspect of your product, for instance. So I think it's also building a bit of a level, like this information architecture is having different levels of complexity that unfold as people need to get more details. Well, thank you for your time and attention today. And yeah, let's stay in touch. We have another webinar coming in a couple of weeks on user research, if you're interested in going a bit deeper in that topic. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and see you around on social channels. Get in touch if you need anything. Or if you have more questions. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.